The Mafia boss took the black maid as his fake date to the reception, but her honesty exposed his enemies. Samantha Jackson never imagined her life would lead her into the world of high society parties, let alone walking arm in arm with one of the most powerful men in New York City. As a maid working for Vincent Russo, the notorious Mafia boss, she had always kept her distance from the glitz and glamour of his world. Her days were spent cleaning his mansion, handling the little things no one else cared about, and quietly observing the life of the man who held everyone's fate in his hands. Vincent was cold, calculated, and never showed an ounce of emotion. But tonight was different. He needed her. He needed her to pretend to be his girlfriend for a night. The gala he was attending, filled with influential people, was too important for him to attend alone. So he asked Samantha, his maid, to accompany him. It was a request that came out of nowhere, and one she couldn't refuse. She was terrified. What did she know about being a date to someone like him? How could she fit in with the world of billionaires, politicians, and the kind of people who made decisions that changed the course of history? But Vincent made it clear, she had no choice. She couldn't turn him down. Her family was in danger, and this was her only chance to keep them safe. As they arrived at the venue, Samantha couldn't help but feel out of place. The grand ballroom, with its glittering chandeliers and elegantly dressed guests, made her feel small and insignificant. She had no idea how to act in a place like this, but Vincent was by her side, and that made her feel just a little bit safer. The guests immediately took notice of the couple as they entered. Vincent, with his sharp suit and commanding presence, drew all eyes to him, while Samantha, dressed in a stunning gown that she had never imagined herself wearing, stood by his side like an accessory to his wealth and power. But the whispers began almost immediately. The people around them made no attempt to hide their judgment. They couldn't believe Vincent Russo, a man of such high status, was with someone like Samantha, a mere maid. She could feel the stares, the looks of disdain, and the quiet gossip. Vincent remained silent, his expression unreadable, but Samantha felt every judgment being cast her way. She was the one who didn't belong here. It wasn't until the dinner started that the tension in the air began to shift. Vincent was deep in conversation with a group of his colleagues, but Samantha was left to fend for herself, standing awkwardly off to the side. The words she overheard made her blood run cold. Whispers about alliances, betrayals, and plans that she couldn't fully comprehend. But then something caught her attention. A man sitting at the far end of the room made eye contact with her. His gaze was sharp, and for a moment, she felt like he was looking right through her. His presence was unsettling, and she quickly looked away, focusing on the glass of wine in her hand. But the feeling didn't go away. Something wasn't right. As the night wore on, the tension in the room grew. Samantha had learned a long time ago to keep quiet, to blend into the background, and to stay out of the way. But she couldn't ignore what was happening. The conversation she overheard earlier, the way the room seemed to shift when certain people spoke, it all felt like something was brewing beneath the surface. And then, it happened. One of the men, a business associate of Vincent's, made a subtle but deadly move. He spoke in a hushed tone, glancing around the room as though trying to keep his words from being heard. Samantha caught a few key phrases. Betrayal. Take him down. He's not the man we thought. The words hit her like a ton of bricks. She didn't know the full extent of what Vincent had been involved in, but she knew enough to understand that these were the words of someone trying to take him down. Her heart raced. What was she supposed to do? She couldn't just stand there and let this happen. She needed to act, and she needed to act now. As Samantha stood there, her mind raced. The whispers she had overheard were too ominous to ignore. She could feel her pulse quicken, a cold sweat beginning to form on her palms. She had never been involved in Vincent's business, but she knew enough to understand that whatever was happening in this room wasn't just about dinner or polite conversation. There was something bigger at play. She needed to act, but what could she do? She was just a maid, after all. Vincent's date, his fake girlfriend for the night. How could she, someone with no power, intervene in something so far beyond her reach? As the evening wore on, the weight of the situation became unbearable. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but the sense of urgency never left her. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Vincent too. If his enemies were here, plotting against him, she had to find a way to stop it. She couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Her eyes darted across the room, looking for any sign of Vincent. He was speaking to a group of men at the far end of the ballroom, his usual composed self, but there was a slight tension in his posture, an edge to his voice that she hadn't noticed before. She wanted to go to him, to warn him, but what could she say? She wasn't part of this world. She wasn't even supposed to be here. As she stood there, lost in thought, a voice interrupted her. "Are you all right?" It was Vincent. His deep voice cut through the noise of the crowd, drawing her attention. Samantha looked up, startled to see him standing before her. His eyes were soft, almost tender, and for a moment, she forgot the weight of the situation. It was as if the world had stopped for a moment, just long enough for her to breathe. "Yes, I'm fine," she replied, her voice shaky. I overheard something. I think you're in danger." Vincent raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, he studied her, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. Then, without a word, he placed a hand on her arm, guiding her to a quieter part of the room. "What did you hear?" he asked, his voice low, barely audible over the hum of the party. Samantha hesitated. She wasn't sure how much to say, but she knew she had to tell him everything. "There are people here who want to take you down," she said in a hushed tone. "I overheard them talking about betrayal and how they were planning to use you as a scapegoat." Vincent's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. She had his full attention now. "Who?" he asked, his voice colder than before. "I don't know their names," Samantha said, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "But I overheard them talking about making a move tonight. They want to take you down, Vincent. And they're using the chaos of this event to do it." Vincent was silent for a moment, processing her words. He didn't seem shocked or surprised, just calculating. His mind was already working, trying to piece together who might be behind this. "Thank you for telling me," he finally said, his voice steady. "You've done more than most would." Samantha felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. There was still the matter of stopping whatever was about to happen. Vincent looked at her, his eyes softening for a brief moment. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low. "We'll figure this out together." Samantha nodded, though she didn't feel any less afraid. She wasn't sure how they could stop what was coming, but she knew one thing. She had just crossed a line. She was no longer just a maid. She was involved, whether she liked it or not. As the night continued, Vincent's demeanor shifted. He was no longer the cold, distant man she had known. He was focused, alert, and determined. His sharp eyes scanned the room, watching every movement, every conversation. Samantha stayed by his side, feeling the tension in the air, but also feeling a sense of purpose. She was no longer just a bystander. She was part of something much bigger. As the evening drew to a close, the plot began to unfold. Vincent moved quickly, his steps purposeful as he approached a group of his closest associates. Samantha followed closely behind, her heart racing. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew this was the moment of truth. Would they stop the betrayal? Or would the night end in disaster? The silence in the room was deafening as Vincent made his move. His voice cut through the tension, commanding the room's attention. "I know what's happening here tonight," he said, his voice steady but filled with authority. "And I'm not going to let it happen." The room fell silent. The tension that had been building throughout the night was palpable, but Vincent stood tall, his eyes scanning the crowd. For a brief moment, it seemed like time stood still. Samantha watched in awe as Vincent took control, his presence undeniable. He was a man of power, of conviction. And now, he was ready to face whatever was coming, no matter the cost. I was standing there, trying to process the weight of Vincent's words. The room was still, tense, as the conversations around us slowly came to a halt. It was as if time itself had slowed, the air heavy with the unsaid, with everything that was about to unfold. I could see the uncertainty in some of the faces around us, but there was something else there too. Respect, maybe even fear. Vincent didn't wait for the silence to stretch too long. He had been through enough situations like this to know that hesitation was a weakness. "I know what's happening here tonight," he repeated, his voice cutting through the silence with authority. "And I'm not going to let it happen." There was no mistaking the finality in his tone. He wasn't asking for permission. He was telling them exactly what would and wouldn't happen. The tension in the room shifted, people shifting uneasily in their seats. It was clear, Vincent wasn't just a boss because of his power. It was his ability to command a room, to take control, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. I stood by his side, still processing what I had just revealed. It felt surreal, like I had crossed some invisible line. But the truth was out now. I was part of this, whether I wanted to be or not. And there was no going back. You all thought you could make a move tonight, that you could play your little game while I was distracted, Vincent continued, his eyes scanning the room, his gaze sharp as a knife. But I've been watching, and I know exactly who's behind this. His words were met with uneasy shifting, but no one spoke. I wasn't sure who he was referring to, but I had no doubt that whatever was coming next would change everything. The way Vincent spoke, the way he held himself, it was as though he already knew how this would play out. He wasn't just reacting to the betrayal. He had been anticipating it. The feeling in the room was different now. People had started to whisper, but it wasn't the same kind of whispering as before. It was quieter, more careful. There was fear now, and it was directed at Vincent. Do you really think you can take me down like this? Vincent's voice was cold, but there was a thread of something darker beneath it. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I built this empire. You don't tear it down by sending your lackeys to play games in the shadows. No one spoke. The silence that followed felt suffocating, thick with tension. Then Vincent did something unexpected. He turned to me, his eyes softening just slightly, like he was reminded of my presence. Samantha, he said, his voice low but gentle. You've done more than most would in this situation. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on the danger, on everything that was happening around us, that I hadn't realized the gravity of what I had just done. I had put myself out there, put us both in this situation, and now I could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on me. I nodded, unable to find words, my throat tight. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Vincent, too. I was in this with him, whether I was ready for it or not. As Vincent continued, his focus shifted back to the crowd, and I could see the change in him. The man I had seen earlier, the cold, calculating boss, was still there, but now, there was something else in his demeanor. There was a calmness, a control that was almost reassuring. It was as though he had everything figured out. He was 3 steps ahead, and everyone else was just catching up. We'll deal with this, and we'll do it the right way, Vincent said, his voice steady, unwavering. No one is getting away with this. Not while I'm still standing. It was clear that Vincent wasn't just reacting to this betrayal. He was setting the stage for something bigger, something that would ripple through his entire empire. As he spoke, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. What kind of man was Vincent really? And what kind of world had I stepped into? The people in the room seemed to understand exactly what he meant, and their expressions shifted, some with fear, others with the cold, calculated understanding that they were about to witness something they couldn't undo. Vincent's reputation wasn't built on power alone. It was built on his ability to control the narrative, to make people bend to his will without them even realizing it. And now, in this room, in front of all these powerful people, I was starting to see that side of him, the side that controlled everything. The tension was still there, hanging in the air like a storm that hadn't quite hit yet. But Vincent wasn't the kind of man who waited for the storm. He was the kind of man who made the storm come to him. I stayed close to him, feeling the weight of his presence, the way everyone in the room seemed to look to him for guidance. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, I was in it now, and there was no turning back. As the room filled with an unsettling stillness, the weight of Vincent's words hung in the air. His voice had already commanded the room's attention, but now, his presence was even more undeniable. There was something about the way he moved, the way he held himself, that made everyone in the room aware of his power. It wasn't just the wealth, the title, or the empire that made Vincent Russo untouchable. It was his ability to make every situation bend to his will. As Vincent stood tall, his eyes scanned the room, locking with each individual present. His gaze never faltered, exuding an authority that felt almost tangible. The tension was palpable, but Vincent wasn't the type to shrink away from pressure. He thrived on it. I'm not here to play games, Vincent said, his tone calm but firm. You want to betray me? You want to take what I've built and tear it down? Then you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Samantha stood silently beside him, still processing everything that had just unfolded. This night was supposed to be a simple event, a pretense, a way to blend into the high society world that Vincent lived in. But now, it had become something much larger. She had inadvertently stepped into a whirlwind, and there was no telling where it would take her. Vincent continued, his voice steady, yet filled with an undertone of something darker. You think I don't know what's going on in my own house? He paused, letting the question hang in the air for a moment before continuing. I see everything. Every look, every whisper. You can't hide from me. Samantha felt her heart race as she glanced around the room. It seemed as though no one dared to move, to even breathe too loudly. The people in this room were used to power, used to control, but there was something about Vincent that made them uneasy. Perhaps it was the way he commanded attention without trying, or the way he held all the cards without anyone even realizing it. I'm going to deal with this, Vincent added, his words cold but calculated. But I'm not going to do it here. Not in front of all these people. He turned to Samantha, his eyes softer now, but the intensity in them was still unmistakable. Come with me, he said. Samantha didn't hesitate. She had followed his lead all night, and despite the growing tension, she trusted him more than anyone else in this room. The two of them walked out of the ballroom, the noise of the party fading behind them as they made their way down a long hallway. Samantha couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This wasn't just a night out anymore. This was something else entirely. As they entered a smaller, quieter room at the end of the hall, Vincent closed the door behind them with a deliberate, almost final motion. He leaned against the wall, his posture still commanding, but there was a shift in his demeanor. Tell me everything, he said, his voice low but insistent. Samantha hesitated, but only for a moment. She had come this far, and now there was no turning back. I heard them talking, she began, her voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty. I couldn't make out all the details, but it was clear. They were planning something against you, something big. She met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. They mentioned you by name. They want to take you down, Vincent, and they're using tonight as a cover. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, his jaw tightening as he processed her words. I figured as much, he said quietly, his tone distant. But the fact that you heard it, that's valuable. More than you know. Samantha swallowed hard, trying to read his expression. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent took a deep breath, then pushed off the wall and walked over to a small desk in the corner. He ran his fingers across the surface of a few scattered papers, his mind clearly working through every detail. After a few moments, he turned to face her. We need to act quickly, he said. But we do it my way. No more surprises. Samantha nodded, unsure of exactly what that meant, but trusting him all the same. She had already learned that Vincent's way was always the way that worked. There was no time to waste. As he moved toward the door, he paused and looked back at her. Stay close, he said, his voice soft but commanding. Things are about to get a lot more complicated, but I'm not going to let anyone take what's mine. Samantha watched as he opened the door, his presence immediately commanding the room outside. She followed him, feeling the weight of what was about to happen settle on her shoulders. Whatever came next, she was no longer just a bystander. She was part of this, and she would face whatever came her way, standing by his side. As they walked back into the hustle and bustle of the event, the energy had shifted. People were still mingling, but there was a new layer of tension in the air. Samantha could feel it, and so could Vincent. His presence was like a beacon, cutting through the noise of the room. This was no longer a night of pretend. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous, and Samantha had just stepped into the center of it. I stood by Vincent, the tension in the room still thick, and though the party had continued in full swing, it felt like everything was in slow motion. The once lively chatter had quieted down, and the murmurs of gossip had shifted into whispers of caution. It was no longer just a reception. It had turned into a battlefield, and Vincent was standing at the center, ready to take control. As we moved through the crowd, I could feel every eye on us. Some were filled with curiosity, others with fear. I could tell that people knew something was wrong. They just didn't know exactly what it was yet. But Vincent did, and his every move radiated confidence. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was the eye of the storm, calm but absolutely in control. Keep close, he said, his voice low, but his command unmistakable. His words weren't just a reminder, they were a directive. His eyes briefly met mine, and I nodded, though the weight of the situation still felt surreal. Here I was, in the middle of a high-society gala, pretending to be his date, yet everything was beginning to unravel. Vincent stopped for a moment, turning his head slightly as if he was weighing his next move. He looked around the room, assessing the faces before him, calculating who knew too much, who was simply a pawn, and who might be planning the betrayal he had heard whispers of. He was strategic, always one step ahead. It was how he had built his empire. "I know they're out there," Vincent muttered under his breath. "And I'm going to make sure they know I'm watching." I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the determined look in his eyes told me that he had everything under control. He always did. The evening had taken a dark turn, and there was no more pretending. As much as I had wanted to escape from this world, from the danger, I couldn't. I had crossed the line, and now, there was no going back. We continued walking, passing groups of people who tried to act casual, but whose eyes lingered just a moment too long. I couldn't help but wonder who among them was involved in the conspiracy, who had been plotting behind Vincent's back. And what did it mean for me? What did it mean for my family? I had never asked to be part of this. I had only wanted a simple life, but that life had been taken from me. And now, there was only one path ahead. As we moved deeper into the crowd, Vincent seemed to notice the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. The way people began to adjust their postures, the way the air grew heavier with each passing moment. He stopped again, and this time, he turned to face me directly. "You've done well, Samantha," he said softly, almost as if speaking to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but I understood it wasn't just about the warning I had given him. It was about everything, about how I had been a part of this world from the moment I had walked into his life. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "I didn't mean to get involved in all of this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to protect my family." Vincent's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You don't need to explain yourself," he replied, his tone firm. "You've done more than anyone else could have, and that's why I'm not going to let them get away with this." He turned back toward the center of the room, his posture shifting as he regained his sense of control. I couldn't help but feel a small wave of relief. He was still Vincent, the man who had everything figured out. As he made his way to the front of the ballroom, people quickly moved out of his way, as if the sheer force of his presence commanded their submission. There was no question who held the power in this room, and it wasn't just his wealth or status. It was the way he exuded authority, the way his every action was calculated, planned. He had been born into this world, and he knew how to navigate it better than anyone. "Stay close," he repeated, his voice once again low but clear. This time, it wasn't just a reminder, it was a reassurance. He wanted me by his side, not as a pawn, but as someone he trusted. And despite everything, I felt a strange sense of pride in that. It was a small victory, but it was something. We reached the front of the room, where several of Vincent's associates were gathered. They immediately stopped talking as soon as they saw him approach, their expressions shifting from casual indifference to respectful attentiveness. Vincent's eyes flicked to each one of them, studying their faces, gauging their reactions. I could feel the weight of their attention, but I kept my head down, standing silently beside him. "I know who's behind this," Vincent said without preamble, his voice carrying across the room. His words were measured, precise. "And I'm not going to let this go unnoticed. Not now, not ever." The room fell silent as everyone processed his words. The air seemed to thicken, and for a brief moment, I could feel the tension spike. No one dared speak. Vincent's reputation preceded him, and he didn't need to say much for everyone to understand the gravity of what he was saying. "You will all report to me," he continued, his voice unwavering. "And I want answers. Now." He turned his back on them and walked toward the exit, with me following closely behind. The world outside the ballroom felt different now. There was no pretending anymore. There was only what came next. And whatever that was, I knew one thing for sure. Vincent was a man of action, and I was no longer just his maid. I was part of something much larger, and the stakes had never been higher. The night was far from over, but the tension had only grown thicker. As we stepped outside the ballroom, the cool night air hit me, but it did little to clear the fog that had settled in my mind. Vincent had always been a man of control, but tonight, there was something different in the air. It was as if the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. He hadn't spoken much since we left the ballroom, but his eyes were scanning the surroundings, ever vigilant, always calculating. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere as we moved through the corridor, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the emptiness. It was clear now that this wasn't just about a simple betrayal. This was the beginning of something much bigger. "We need to move quickly," Vincent said, his voice low but firm. "If they think they have time, they're wrong. I don't give anyone the luxury of that." His words sent a chill through me. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about control, power, and making sure that no one would dare challenge him again. I couldn't help but wonder who these people were, the ones plotting behind Vincent's back. Who were they, and what did they want? I didn't have the answers, but I knew that Vincent had already figured it out. His mind was always 3 steps ahead. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Samantha," he began, his voice softer now, but no less intense. "I need you to stay close to me. Do not stray." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been thrust into this world without warning, without preparation. But now, there was no choice but to follow his lead. He had made it clear, we were in this together, whether I was ready or not. As we walked down the hallway, I noticed the guards positioned outside the doors, their eyes scanning every movement. Vincent's reach was far, and the people who worked for him were loyal. No one moved without his say-so. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent glanced at me, his eyes dark and steady. "To make sure no one gets away with this," he said simply. The door ahead of us was large, ornate, the kind of door that felt out of place in a normal house, but right at home in a mansion like this. As we approached, the guards stood straighter, their posture instantly shifting from casual to alert. Vincent nodded to them, and they opened the door without a word. Inside, the room was dimly lit, but the figures within it were unmistakable. 2 men stood at a long table, papers scattered before them, their conversation halting as Vincent entered. They straightened immediately, their faces showing a mix of respect and fear. Vincent walked into the room without hesitation, his presence filling the space. The 2 men exchanged uncertain glances, but neither made a move. "Gentlemen," Vincent said, his voice smooth but carrying an edge that left no room for doubt. "It seems there are some things happening that I wasn't made aware of. Care to explain?" The 2 men didn't speak right away. They looked at each other as if deciding how to respond. Vincent didn't give them that luxury. "You thought I wouldn't notice," he continued. "That's the problem with making assumptions. They always lead to mistakes." The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see the men begin to shift uncomfortably under Vincent's gaze. But despite their discomfort, neither of them spoke. Vincent didn't wait for them to start. He took a step forward, his voice lowering but growing more intense. "I don't tolerate betrayal. You think you can plot behind my back? Think again." The silence in the room deepened. The men were no longer looking at each other for reassurance. They were looking at Vincent, waiting for whatever came next. The gravity of the situation wasn't lost on me. These weren't just men in suits. They were part of Vincent's empire, part of a machine that ran smoothly when everyone followed the rules. And breaking those rules, as I had learned tonight, could be disastrous. The first man, the one closest to the table, finally spoke. "It wasn't supposed to go this far, Vincent," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "We didn't mean." Vincent held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Save it," he said coldly. "I've heard enough excuses in my time to last a lifetime. You're either with me, or you're not. There's no middle ground." The second man, the one sitting at the far end of the table, stood up slowly. His face was pale, his hands visibly trembling. We thought the timing would be right," he stammered. "But we didn't expect." "You didn't expect me," Vincent interrupted, his voice cutting through the man's words. "That's the problem with underestimating me. I always see the bigger picture." The second man flinched, his face drained of color. I could tell that whatever Vincent had planned, it wasn't going to be kind to these men. And somehow, I knew they deserved whatever came next. "Now leave," Vincent said, his voice chillingly calm. The 2 men didn't argue. They didn't say another word. They simply walked out of the room, their heads down in shame. As the door closed behind them, Vincent turned to me. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice softer now, but no less intense. "You've proven more useful than I expected." I wasn't sure how to respond. I was still trying to process everything that had happened. The secrets, the power plays, the danger that seemed to follow Vincent everywhere. But as we stood there, in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, I knew one thing for certain. I was in deeper than I had ever been. And there was no turning back. The door clicked shut behind us as Vincent and I stood in the dimly lit room. The only sound now the soft hum of the air conditioning. The tension that had filled the air moments before began to settle, but the unease still lingered. The weight of what had just happened, what had been revealed, was heavy, and I could feel it pressing down on my chest. Vincent stood across from me, his back to the wall, arms crossed as he stared out the window. I could see the reflection of the city lights in the glass, but his face was unreadable, as always. For a moment, there was only silence. I wasn't sure what to say. I had just helped uncover a betrayal that threatened everything Vincent had built. And yet, here I was, standing in front of him, unsure of my place in all of this. He was a man of action, always decisive, always in control. But tonight, something was different. There was a quiet intensity to him, a focus that made it clear that whatever was coming next was going to be significant. Finally, Vincent spoke. "You did good, Samantha," he said, his voice low but steady. "I won't forget it." His words were simple, but they carried weight. I wasn't sure if he was thanking me, or if it was a reminder that I was now part of something much larger than I had ever anticipated. "I just told you what I overheard," I replied, still trying to make sense of everything. "It wasn't anything special." Vincent turned to face me, his eyes locking onto mine. For a brief moment, I saw something there, something deeper than I had ever noticed before. A flicker of appreciation, maybe, but also something else. Something more calculating. "It was more than that," he said. "You've proven you're not just some maid hiding in the background. You saw something, and you acted. That's more than most people would ever do." His words felt like a strange kind of validation, but they also came with a heavy responsibility. I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I had made a choice. I had chosen to step into this world, and now there was no turning back. The weight of that realization hit me harder than I had expected. Vincent had made it clear. Once you're in his world, there's no way out. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's gaze never left me as he walked toward the door, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. "Now we wait," he said. "But we also prepare. I won't let this go unnoticed. These people think they can take me down, but they're about to learn what happens when you make a mistake." He paused at the door, looking over his shoulder at me. "You've already proven yourself, Samantha. Stick with me, and you'll see how this ends." I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but something in the way he said it made me realize just how much I had underestimated him. Vincent wasn't the kind of man to sit idly by. He would strike back, and when he did, it would be with precision and force. But he wasn't just talking about his enemies. He was talking about the world we were both in now, the world where nothing was certain and loyalty was everything. I didn't know how much I could trust him, not completely. But in that moment, I realized that I had already crossed a line, and there was no going back. As Vincent left the room, I stood there for a moment, my mind racing with everything that had happened. The party, the betrayal, the subtle shifts in Vincent's demeanor, it was all starting to sink in. This wasn't just a job for me anymore. It was something much more dangerous. But I had made my choice. And now, I had to see it through. The night felt heavier than before, but I wasn't sure if it was because of what I had learned or because of what was still to come. Vincent was right about one thing. The people who were against him didn't realize what they were up against. They thought they had time, that they could play their little game without consequences. But they were wrong. Vincent was a man who didn't waste time. And neither was I. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights shimmered in the distance, a reminder of how small I had once felt, how far removed I had been from this world. But now, I was right in the middle of it. And whether I was ready or not, I was going to have to learn how to navigate it. The door opened again, and I turned to see Vincent standing in the doorway, his posture as commanding as ever. "We need to move quickly," he said. "It won't be long before they make their next move. I want to be ready." I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure what that meant. But I didn't question him. I had seen what happened when people underestimated him, and I wasn't about to be one of those people. "Let's do it," I said. Vincent gave me a sharp nod before turning and heading out the door. I followed him, knowing that whatever came next would test me in ways I couldn't predict. But one thing was clear. I was no longer just the maid. I was part of this, and that meant I had a role to play in whatever was coming. As we moved through the hallway, I felt the weight of Vincent's presence beside me. There was a confidence in his every step, an unwavering belief in his ability to control whatever happened next. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever he had planned, whatever was coming, I was going to be right there with him. And I had no idea what that would mean for me. But I was ready to find out. The next few days passed in a blur, the world around me moving at a speed I could barely keep up with. Vincent's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, we need to move quickly, star. It was clear now that whatever plans Vincent had, they were already set in motion, and he had no intention of letting anyone stand in his way. Each conversation, each glance, each subtle shift in the room made it evident that the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. The power Vincent held was not just about money or influence. It was about control, about knowing every move before it was made, and being prepared for the consequences before they even happened. I was still trying to process everything when Vincent pulled me aside one evening, his expression unreadable as always. We need to talk, he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the noise around us. There are things you need to know. I nodded, though I had no idea what to expect. It wasn't like him to offer explanations. Vincent operated on instinct, not words. We walked to a private study at the back of the mansion, a quiet place where no one would interrupt. As the door closed behind us, he turned to face me. You've proven yourself more than I expected, he said, his tone softening for a brief moment. But the game is just beginning, Samantha. And now, you're in it too. I could feel the weight of his words. I had stepped into a world I had only ever observed from a distance, a world where loyalty was everything, and betrayal could cost more than just money. I had given him my trust, but now, I wasn't sure what that trust would mean. He had already shown me how quickly he could turn the tables. What do you mean? I'm in it too, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. This isn't just about the people who betrayed me, he said, his gaze locked on mine. This is about the entire system I've built. And now, you're a part of that system. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. You've seen what happens when people cross me. But the game doesn't end there. There are bigger forces at play, and if we don't act quickly, we could lose everything. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. You'll need to learn how to navigate this world, how to make sure the right people are on your side, and how to spot the ones who are just waiting for the right moment to strike. I swallowed hard, the reality of the situation hitting me all at once. This wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was about power, control, and keeping the people you trusted from stabbing you in the back. And now, I was tangled in it all, just as deeply as Vincent. I'll show you how to read people, how to know who's playing you and who's playing the game with you, Vincent continued. It's not about what they say, it's about what they do. Their actions will tell you everything you need to know. I nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of his words. I had been thrust into a world of power plays, deceit, and alliances, and the only way out was forward, no matter how dangerous the path might be. Vincent studied me for a moment longer before his expression hardened once more. But be careful, he added, his voice now cold and steely. The closer you get to me, the more dangerous it becomes. There are people out there who will use you to get to me, and they won't hesitate to destroy anyone who gets in their way. I could feel the tension in the air, the silent promise of the world I had just entered. There was no turning back. I can handle it, I said, my voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. Vincent's gaze softened just a fraction, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Good, he said simply, because this is where it gets interesting. Over the following days, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of meetings, conversations, and decisions. Vincent was constantly on the move, but he never let me out of his sight. He wanted me to learn quickly, to adapt to the intricacies of his world. He had people everywhere, in every corner of his empire, and he knew how to make them work for him. There were times when I was overwhelmed, when I felt like I was drowning in a sea of unfamiliar faces and complex alliances. But Vincent never let me falter. He would pull me aside, giving me small lessons in how to read a person's body language, how to notice the subtle shift in someone's tone when they were lying. It's all about control, he would tell me. Control of the situation, control of the people around you, and control of your own emotions. If you let them see you're afraid, they'll use it against you. But if you can make them believe you're just as powerful as they are, you'll own the room. The lessons were exhausting, but I didn't mind. I knew that if I was going to survive in this world, I had to learn everything he was teaching me. And slowly, I started to understand. I began to see the power dynamics at play in every conversation, every exchange. It wasn't just about making deals, it was about shaping the narrative, bending others to your will without them even realizing it. As the days turned into weeks, I felt myself changing. I wasn't just the maid anymore. I wasn't just Vincent's fake date. I was becoming someone else, someone who understood the rules of the game. I was learning how to play it, and I was learning how to win. But even as I grew more confident in this new world, I knew there was still so much more to uncover. Vincent had his secrets, and I was beginning to realize that there were parts of him I still didn't fully understand. But as long as I was by his side, I knew one thing for sure. I was in the game now, and there was no going back. The days blended together as I continued to learn Vincent's world, but the weight of the choices I'd made never left me. Every decision I made, every person I spoke to, felt like a move in a game I still barely understood. Vincent's lessons were becoming more intense, more intricate. He wasn't just teaching me how to survive in his world. He was teaching me how to control it. His empire was vast, built on loyalty, deceit, and power, and he was showing me the ropes. But there was still so much I didn't know. Still so much I didn't understand. As we spent more time together, I found myself at the center of this world, navigating the complex relationships between allies and enemies. I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I had a role to play, and Vincent made sure I knew it. One evening, after a long day of meetings and discussions, we sat in his office, the only sound the soft hum of the city outside. Vincent had been unusually quiet all evening, and I could feel the tension building between us. There was something different in the air, something he hadn't told me. "What's going on?" I asked, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Vincent didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied the papers in front of him, his fingers tapping the surface of the desk. It was a simple gesture, but one that conveyed his thoughts were far beyond the papers in front of him. Finally, he looked up, his eyes locking with mine. "We're moving up," he said simply. "Things are about to change." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "Moving up?" I asked. "What does that mean?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "It means the stakes are higher now. No more pretending. No more games. We're going after the people who think they can take me down. And I'm not waiting around for them to make their move." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was it. The point of no return. I had been pulled into this world without asking for it, but now there was no turning back. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. Vincent's gaze softened slightly, but the intensity never left his eyes. "We act, but we do it on our terms. We control the narrative. We make them think they're in control until it's too late." He stood up, walking over to the window, his back to me as he looked out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but they seemed distant, cold. "They think they can outplay me," he said, his voice low. "They think they can take what's mine, but they don't understand who they're dealing with." I watched him, trying to read his expression, trying to understand what he meant. The silence between us felt heavy, like something was about to change. "Vincent," I said carefully, my voice breaking through the quiet. "Are we ready for this?" He turned to face me, his expression hardening, his eyes darkening with resolve. "I've been ready for this my whole life," he said, his voice unwavering. "Now, it's time to make them regret ever crossing me." I could feel the weight of his words, the depth of his conviction. It wasn't just about power for Vincent, it was about proving something. Proving that no one, no matter how powerful, could take him down. I nodded, understanding that the path ahead would not be easy, but there was no other choice. "What's the plan?" I asked. Vincent walked toward me, his eyes still focused, calculating. "We need to gather information," he said. "We need to know exactly who's behind this, who we're dealing with." He paused, then added, "And we need to make sure no one else can get in our way." The determination in his voice sent a shiver through me. This was no longer just a matter of survival. It was a war, one that Vincent was determined to win. As we discussed the next steps, I realized that I had crossed a line. There was no going back. I was no longer just a bystander in this world. I was a player, and the game had just become much more dangerous. Over the next few days, we began to put Vincent's plan into action. The first step was to gather intel. Vincent had people everywhere, and he wasn't afraid to use them. He made calls, set up meetings, and began the process of uncovering the identities of those who had been plotting against him. But this wasn't just about gathering information. It was about positioning. Vincent knew how to make people think they were in control while he was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. As the days passed, I could feel the tension building. Vincent was always several steps ahead, and it was clear that he was preparing for something big. But I still didn't know what it was. I didn't know how this was going to end. One evening, as we were reviewing the information we had gathered, Vincent turned to me, his face grim. "It's time," he said simply. "We make our move." I didn't hesitate. I had already committed to this, to him, and there was no turning back. We were in this together now, and whatever came next, we would face it head on. The night before our move, the tension in the air felt almost unbearable. It wasn't just the weight of what we were about to do. It was the quiet sense of anticipation that hung over everything. Vincent was already focused, every action deliberate, his mind constantly working through every possible outcome. I could feel the intensity radiating off him. There was no room for mistakes, no room for hesitation. We were on the cusp of something major, and Vincent wasn't about to let anyone stand in his way. As I sat in his study, watching him prepare, I felt the pressure building. He hadn't said much to me since the decision was made. He didn't need to. I could tell he was working through the plan in his mind, adjusting it, fine-tuning it to perfection. His every move was precise. It was how he had built his empire. Every piece was put into place with care, and now we were moving. The time for waiting was over. Vincent looked up from his papers, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low but firm. I nodded, trying to steady the flutter in my chest. "I'm ready." The words didn't sound as certain as I wanted them to, but they were the truth. I had no choice now. I was in this with him, no turning back. He gave a slight nod, the corner of his mouth twitching into something like a smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Good. Let's make them regret ever thinking they could take me down." The determination in his voice sent a chill through me. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about showing the world what Vincent Russo was truly capable of. And I was about to be right beside him as he did it. We left the mansion in silence, the car's engine humming quietly as we drove through the night. The city lights reflected in the windows, casting fleeting shadows across Vincent's face. I couldn't help but feel the weight of what we were about to do. This wasn't just about us anymore. The stakes were higher than ever, and there was no room for failure. As we approached the meeting point, Vincent leaned back in his seat, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. "Once we're in, there's no going back," he said quietly. "We move quickly, we stay in control, and we make sure they never forget who they're dealing with." I nodded, my stomach tight with nerves. I had been learning, observing, and listening, but this was the moment that would define everything. As the car came to a stop, Vincent's hand reached for the door handle. He glanced at me one last time, his gaze intense. "Stay close," he said, "and don't let anyone see you hesitate. They'll be watching." I didn't need to be told twice. The weight of his words hung in the air as we stepped out into the cold night, the lights from the building ahead casting long shadows across the ground. We walked toward the entrance, the familiar sound of footsteps echoing in the empty street. I kept my eyes focused ahead, trying to ignore the rising anxiety in my chest. Vincent moved with purpose, every step measured and confident. I stayed by his side, close but not too close. He wasn't one to show weakness, and neither could I. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The room was filled with men in expensive suits, their conversations quiet, their eyes darting around the room as if they were waiting for something. As we entered, all conversation ceased. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward us, and Vincent didn't flinch. His presence filled the room, demanding attention, and he moved toward the center like he owned the place. I followed silently, trying to keep my composure. These were men who were used to power, used to control, but they weren't used to Vincent. They weren't used to someone who could take everything from them with a single move. Vincent stopped in the middle of the room, his eyes scanning the faces around him. He said nothing at first, just let the silence stretch, let them feel the weight of his presence. Then, when it was clear he had their full attention, he spoke, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I know why you're all here," he said, "and I know who's been behind the attempt to bring me down. But you underestimated me." He let the words hang in the air, his gaze never wavering. The men shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Vincent wasn't done. I built this empire from the ground up, he continued, his voice growing colder with every word. And I don't let anyone take what's mine. Not without consequences. A few of the men exchanged nervous glances, but Vincent didn't give them the chance to speak. He moved forward, taking control of the room with every step. You thought you could pull the strings behind my back. But now, you're the ones who will answer to me. I watched from the edge of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. Vincent wasn't just talking to them. He was commanding the room, asserting his power in a way that was impossible to ignore. He wasn't afraid, and that fearlessness made him even more dangerous. This is my empire, Vincent said, his voice low and threatening. And anyone who thinks they can take it from me will regret it. Understand. There was a long pause before one of the men spoke, his voice shaky. You think you can just walk in here and take over? Vincent turned to him, his gaze sharp. I don't think. I know. The man fell silent, his mouth closing as he realized the depth of the situation. Vincent had already won. The room was his. I could see it in the way the others stood back, in the way they seemed to shrink under his gaze. Vincent didn't need to prove anything. He already had control. As we left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. We had just made a move that would ripple through the entire city, and I was right there beside him, in the center of it all. I didn't know where this path would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. Vincent Russo wasn't someone you crossed. And now, neither was I. The days after our meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Vincent's empire, which had once seemed like an untouchable fortress, now felt like it was shifting in ways I wasn't fully prepared for. There was an undeniable sense of urgency in the air, a feeling that the walls were closing in on us. Every decision Vincent made seemed calculated, his every move deliberate, as if he were orchestrating a symphony. But I couldn't help but notice the growing tension around him. The people we had once trusted were beginning to show cracks, and Vincent was carefully watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I was no longer just an observer, no longer just the maid. I was in this world now, and I had a front row seat to everything unfolding. As we moved through the days, Vincent took me into more meetings, each one more intense than the last. I began to understand the intricacies of his empire, the alliances, the rivalries, and the delicate balance he maintained to keep everything under control. He wasn't just a boss, he was a strategist, a master of the game, and I was learning from the best. But there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in my chest. I had seen how Vincent handled threats, how he played people against each other. But this felt different. This wasn't just about power or control. This was personal. One night, after a long meeting, Vincent and I were alone in his office. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing a series of reports, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the desk lamp. I stood by the window, staring out at the city below. The view was breathtaking, the lights of the skyline stretching out into the horizon, but it felt distant, almost foreign. I was no longer the person who looked up at those lights with wonder. I had crossed into a world where the view was only a reminder of the price you paid for power. Something's off, I said quietly, my voice breaking the silence in the room. Vincent didn't look up, but his attention shifted to me. What do you mean? He asked, his voice calm, almost too calm. I turned to face him, my gaze steady. I don't know. It's just, I don't feel like I'm getting the full picture here. You've been making all the right moves, but I get the sense that someone's still pulling strings behind the scenes. Vincent's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in days, I saw something different in them. It wasn't anger or frustration, but a flicker of something else. Something that felt like a storm building. You're not wrong, he said, his voice low. There's someone out there who's been moving in the shadows. They're smart, calculating. They think they've outsmarted me. His words sent a chill through me. It was one thing to hear about enemies from a distance, but it was another to realize that the enemy was already inside. Do you know who it is? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Vincent stood up from his desk, walking slowly toward the door. I'm not sure yet, he said, his tone cold, but with a hint of something sharper beneath it. But I will find out. And when I do, they won't have a place to hide. He paused, looking back at me. Stay close, Samantha. The next few days are going to be crucial, and I need to know I can trust you. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I wasn't sure if he was asking for my loyalty or testing it, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was survival. You have my trust, I said, my voice unwavering. Vincent didn't answer right away. He simply turned back to his desk, his eyes flicking to the papers in front of him. But I could see the weight of the situation pressing on him. There were no easy answers, no shortcuts. It was all about strategy now. And Vincent was a master strategist. Over the next few days, the atmosphere grew more tense. Vincent had set his plan into motion, but the sense of danger was palpable. Every conversation, every interaction seemed to be laced with a deeper meaning. I could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting with every passing moment. I didn't know who was behind this shadowy figure, this invisible enemy who had been pulling strings from the sidelines, but I knew Vincent would find them. He always found what he was looking for, and when he did, I wasn't sure what would happen next. I just knew that I had to be ready. Vincent didn't say much about what he was doing in those days, but I could see the pieces falling into place. He was moving strategically, making sure that every angle was covered. His mind was constantly working, and even though I was learning how to play this game alongside him, there were times when I felt out of my depth. But I wasn't going to back down. Vincent had chosen me for a reason, and I was determined to prove that I could handle whatever came our way. One night, after another long meeting, Vincent and I sat in his office once more, the tension between us almost suffocating. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I need you to do something," he said, his voice low but commanding. "There's someone I need you to speak to. Someone who can give us the information we need." My heart skipped a beat. I had been expecting this, but the reality of it hit me harder than I had anticipated. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his eyes locking onto mine. "A contact of mine," he said. "They'll know who's been working behind the scenes. And you're the only one who can get close enough to them." I nodded, the weight of the responsibility settling in. This was no longer just about playing the game. It was about taking control, gaining information, and using it to stay one step ahead of our enemies. Vincent stood up, walking over to me. "You're ready for this, Samantha," he said, his voice firm, but with a touch of something like confidence. "I've seen it in you. Now, it's time to prove it." I nodded again, my resolve strengthening. I had come this far, and there was no turning back. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice steady. Vincent gave me a small, approving nod. "I know you will." And just like that, we were back in the game. The stakes had never been higher, and there was no turning back now. I was part of Vincent's world, his empire, and I was ready to fight for it. The morning after Vincent's ultimatum, the weight of what was coming next settled heavily on me. He had given me a task, one that felt like it would change everything. I wasn't sure who his contact was, or what kind of information I was supposed to extract, but I knew it would require every ounce of composure I had learned from him. Over the past weeks, I had been slowly stepping into his world, learning how to navigate it, understanding the dynamics at play. But now it felt real. Vincent wasn't just testing me anymore. He was trusting me. And that was a trust one couldn't afford to betray. I met Vincent in his office that morning. He had a stack of papers in front of him, his sharp gaze fixed on the documents, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere, working through the next steps. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, almost casual, but there was an edge to it that made it clear he was waiting for something more than just an answer. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "I'm ready." The air between us was thick with the unspoken. Vincent didn't need to explain anything further. I could feel the tension in his movements. He was already several steps ahead, already planning what came next. "Good," he said, rising from his desk. "You're going to meet someone today. They'll be able to give you what we need to stay ahead. But you need to be careful. This person can't be trusted completely. No one can. Remember everything I've taught you. Watch their actions, not just their words. Don't let them play you." I nodded again, taking in every word. It was clear now. Vincent wasn't just preparing me for this moment. He was preparing me for something bigger, something I couldn't fully understand yet. "I won't let you down," I said, my voice steady despite the rising nerves. He gave me a slight nod, a gesture of approval, but also one that carried a sense of finality. "I know you won't," he said, his voice softening just a little. "Now go. Time is of the essence." I left his office with a mix of anxiety and determination. I had come so far, and now I had to prove that I could handle what Vincent had entrusted me with. As I walked down the hall, the weight of my task pressed against me. The city outside felt like a blur, each step I took feeling like a move in a game I didn't yet know how to win. I was on my way to meet a contact of Vincent's, someone who held the key to the next phase of our plan. But who were they? And why was Vincent so wary? As I arrived at the designated meeting place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The streets were busy, but there was a subtle quiet in the air, a tension I couldn't quite place. I approached the coffee shop where we were supposed to meet, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been in many high-stakes situations since meeting Vincent, but this felt different. I wasn't just playing a part anymore. I was a part of this world, and I was about to face it head-on. Inside the shop, the noise of the espresso machine and soft chatter faded as I scanned the room. A man sat in the far corner, his face partially obscured by a newspaper. He didn't look up as I approached, but I knew it was him. Vincent had given me a description, and this was the person I was supposed to trust. I sat down across from him, my heart still racing. He put the newspaper down slowly, his dark eyes studying me with an intensity that matched Vincent's. "You're early," he said, his voice rough, yet controlled. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I studied him, trying to read the tension in his body, the slight shift in his posture. "Vincent sent me," I said simply. He didn't react to my words, but his gaze hardened just a bit. "Vincent always has someone else do his dirty work," he muttered, then looked me up and down. "What makes you think I'm going to help you?" I held his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Because Vincent doesn't trust anyone. Not completely, but he trusts me to get this information." His lips curled into a small, almost amused smile. "Trust? Vincent Russo and trust go together like oil and water." I didn't flinch. "He trusts me enough to send me," I said, keeping my tone firm. "And you'll help us." He sat back, appraising me as if I were just another pawn on the board. "You think you can just walk in here, take the information, and walk out?" His eyes narrowed. "Vincent's not the only one who plays the game." I was silent for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. He was testing me, just like Vincent had. "I'm not here to play games," I said quietly. "I'm here to do what Vincent asked. You'll help us, or you won't. Your choice." The man looked at me for a long moment, weighing my words. I could tell he was deciding whether or not to trust me. In the end, he nodded slowly. "Fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But understand this. Vincent isn't the only one who has eyes everywhere. You'd better watch your back." I nodded, a sense of resolve settling in. "I'm not afraid." He slid an envelope across the table to me. "Everything you need is in there. Take it, and get out of here. And remember what I said." I grabbed the envelope, feeling the weight of it in my hands. This was it. The next step. I stood up, ready to leave, but as I turned to walk away, I paused. "One last thing," I said, my voice steady. "If anyone comes after Vincent, they'll have to deal with me." The man chuckled darkly, but I could see a hint of respect in his eyes. "You've got guts," he said. "I'll give you that." I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I left the coffee shop, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. As I stepped back into the street, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. This wasn't just about playing Vincent's game anymore. It was about survival, and the game was getting more dangerous with every move. I walked back to the car, ready for whatever came next. I had done my part, and now it was time to see if Vincent's trust in me was well placed. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was no longer just a spectator in this world. I was part of it, and I was ready to fight for my place. The tension in the air was palpable as I walked back to Vincent's mansion, the envelope still clutched tightly in my hand. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of everything that had been building up to this point. The drive was long, each mile stretching out like an eternity. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation I'd had with Vincent's contact, the cold, calculating tone of his voice, the subtle hints of threats buried beneath his words. It was clear that no one in Vincent's world could be fully trusted, not even those who were supposed to be on his side. The city outside the car window passed by in a blur of lights and shadows, a stark reminder of how fast things could change. I had been thrust into this life, this world of power plays and hidden agendas, and now I was in deeper than I had ever imagined. The envelope contained everything we needed, but the question remained, was it enough? I arrived at the mansion just as the sun began to set, the darkening sky casting long shadows across the driveway. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance, the weight of the moment heavy on my shoulders. Vincent was waiting for me inside. I could feel his presence even before I entered the room. He was always so composed, so in control, but tonight, there was something different in the air, something sharper. I found him in his study, his back to me as he stared out the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "You got it?" he asked without turning around, his voice low but filled with expectation. I handed him the envelope, the paper rustling in the quiet room. Vincent took it without a word and carefully opened it. I watched as he scanned the contents, his eyes flicking back and forth across the pages. There was no emotion on his face, just the steady focus that had become so familiar to me. It was as if he were reading a map, charting the course of his next move. After a long moment, he folded the papers back into the envelope and looked up at me. "This is good," he said, his voice steady. "This is exactly what we needed." Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I knew this was only the beginning. We had the information, but now we had to act. And in Vincent's world, acting meant taking control and taking risks. "What's next?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent walked over to the desk, his steps measured, deliberate. He didn't look at me as he spoke, his focus on the papers in front of him. "We move," he said simply. "We make our move, and we do it on our terms. We're not waiting for anyone to make the first move anymore." The finality in his tone left no room for doubt. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. We were moving forward, no matter the consequences. I stood there, watching him as he worked through his plan, his mind already calculating the next steps. I had learned by now that Vincent didn't waste time. When he made a decision, it was already done in his mind. And now, I was a part of that decision. He turned to me then, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "You're not just a bystander anymore, Samantha," he said, his voice low and filled with purpose. "You're in this with me. We're doing this together." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling on me. I wasn't just his accomplice anymore. I wasn't just the maid or the date. I was a part of the plan, a part of something much bigger. And I wasn't sure if that made me feel safer or more terrified. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. Vincent smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, someone who had already won in his mind. "I need you to be ready," he said. "Because when this starts, it won't stop until we've taken everything back." He paused, his gaze softening just slightly. "And I trust you to help me make it happen." His words, though simple, held more weight than anything else he had said. I wasn't just an ally in this world anymore. I was his equal partner. And that responsibility was enough to make anyone nervous. But there was no turning back now. I had already committed to this life, and there was no escaping it. Vincent was right. It was time to move. The plan had already been set in motion, and now it was just a matter of executing it flawlessly. As the night stretched on, Vincent continued to map out his strategy, making phone calls, meeting with key figures, setting things in motion. I stayed by his side, watching and learning, trying to understand the intricacies of the moves he was making. Every conversation, every decision, was a step toward his ultimate goal. And now, I was a part of it. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for sure. The game had changed. We were no longer just reacting to the world around us. We were taking control. Vincent had already built his empire, but now, he was about to expand it. And I was going to be right there beside him, helping him tear down the walls of anyone who dared to challenge him. As the night wore on, I felt the weight of what was coming pressed down on me. But there was something else in the air too, anticipation. We were about to change everything, and nothing would ever be the same.